Welcome to New Realities. My name is Alan Steinfeld, and on this program I'd like to investigate the latest in spiritual knowledge and how we're moving forward as a planetary race, not just individual nations, but a whole body of humanity is moving towards spiritual enlightenment and an opening and an awakening to the other levels of consciousness. Tonight's guest is someone who's investigated these fields his whole life. He's one of my favorite guests. He's a linguist, philosopher, anthropologist, sound acoustical engineer, I would say, and understanding of ancient civilizations is one of his specialties. He's written a book called Keys of Enoch, and recently he's published this book, the Pista Sophia, with his wife Desirea. And it's a beautiful translation of a Gnostic text about Jesus and his teachings after the resurrection. And it's information that hasn't been in the mainstream Bible. He's going to be talking about that with us tonight. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Alan.
Pista Sophia.
These words mean faith, pistis, Sophia, wisdom. It is a celebration of the meeting of minds, both from the Eastern perspective and the Western perspective of the ancient traditions of philosophy, psychology, and spirituality.
So you wrote an amazing text called The Keys of Enoch, which was your, I guess, visitation and interpretations of the higher levels of consciousness. Now, how does this book, the Pista Sophia, fit into your knowledge from the Keys of Enoch?
The Keys of Enoch represent a mystical experience of seeing a blueprint of civilization, where we are presently and where we're going into the future. In this context, the Keys of Enoch refer to very special texts of antiquity, and the Pista Sophia was one of the ancient texts from Egypt that I experienced in my inner mystical experience.
So that came to you. Now it's a Gnostic text. People don't really know who the Gnostics were because the established church has wiped out any early competition. So the whole knowledge of who the Gnostics and what they represented were wiped out. Can you just help people?
Right. Gnosticism represents a movement that was there prior to the Christian era. We find it in all religions. It seeks to celebrate the divinity of man and what we would call the man-God partnership in the historic sense. Gnosticism is the underlying thread of modern psychology. It is a synthesis of ancient science, theology, and experience. And the Pista Sophia represents writings in Egypt that were there in the 1st and 2nd century of this era, before Christianity became an establishment religion.
So there were a group of people that called themselves the Gnostics, and they were followers of Jesus, or they were synthesizers of the Egyptian knowledge and the Hermetic knowledge with the teachings of Jesus.
In a larger scope, we find mysticism and Gnosticism in some forms of intertestamental Judaism. This is incorporated in the writings of the disciples of Jesus, and we find this also in Egypt, where we have a thread of ancient Egyptian teaching and Hebraic teaching merged in a unique relationship.
Yeah, in Alexandria, a lot of those different trends came together.
This is where the great library of the ancient world was. This is where Plato, we were told, Pythagoras, Homer, all of the great philosophers of the West went to school, or at least were disciples of some great school of teaching.
So Gnosticism means to know, gnosis.
Gnosticism is a pathway of seeking divine experience through knowledge.
Right.
And we find this in a contemporary sense of noetics. In fact, when the Noetics Institute was set up some years ago in California, it was spelled with an N, noetics, which was derived from the word gnosis, or higher experience.
So Jesus, in a sense, was a real teacher of gnosis, of Gnosticism, essentially.
In my opinion, he was to celebrate the man-God partnership, and also to let everybody know that there was no need of an intermediary priesthood, rabbinate, or the use of other spiritual intermediaries.
So you've translated this book, the Pista Sophia. Where is the original? Where did you get the ancient text from?
I was able to acquire a copy of the text from the library in London, and that in turn was based upon a 17th century document that traces itself back. Various scholars of the 19th century, like Carl Schmitt, rendered translations in German and some of the European languages. However, the 5 volumes of this study are so complicated, requiring a knowledge of what I would call the Kabbalistic tradition of Judaism, with an emphasis on the inner and outer knowledge. So let me explain this with one of the charts that goes with the text. We see here, we can have close up the tree of life, showing what is called the inner and outer, or the twin savior aspect. The tree of life represents all the divine attributes that we have, from higher knowledge and wisdom to the elements of the heart, unconditional love. The trees here represent the inner salvation path, which is through the divine feminine, that matches the outer path that comes to the divine masculine. So Hebraic Gnosticism, like Coptic Gnosticism, brings together the aspect of the Divine Father and the Divine Mother.
I see. So what's important in this book is that Jesus actually outlines the hierarchies of the other planes of consciousness.
That's right.
And maybe you can go a little bit into that, because I think that's one of the key elements, is that, there's many mansions in my Father's house, right? Is that what the saying is? And so we are living on one plane of reality, but there's infinite amounts, and it's mapped out here.
Very precisely.
Yes.
And the ancient context of the house of many mansions, or the use of multiple levels for the migration of the soul, was something that was not taught in traditional religion. It was something that was part of the mystery religions. The Christ figure, according to the Pista Sophia, returns after his resurrection to teach his disciples in a body of glory, both male and female disciples, how they all share equally in the secrets of the kingdom. And the narrative vehicle here is the female soul, which is called Sophia. She who is the holy Chokhmah in Hebrew, the holy wisdom in Greek, represents each of us in the struggle through the worlds of darkness within the body, the psychic death, the spiritual voyage, and ultimately the ultimate ascent that takes place after this life. In this next schematic that I have from the book, we have what is called the ineffable, the divine name, and the limbs of the ineffable, which is basically the cosmic roadmap. If you look very carefully where I'm pointing, you see the depiction of the tree of life, the Etz Chaim, as it is called in the Kabbalistic tradition.
It's a hologram here. It's not a two-dimensional tree like we see.
Exactly. And you will see there are multiple trees representing the mind, body, and spirit, what we call today the 3 major divisions of philosophical thinking. Basically, what this is depicting is the person who has self-realization unifies his body, mind, and spirit in such a way that he or she can ascend through the various dimensions of psychic exploration, spiritual creativity, and even in the worlds of science and knowledge, as depicted in the book, understand astronomy and cosmology of other worlds we would call today parallel evolution.
And so this book is an outline for that, you're saying?
This book is basically a love letter from the soul of Christ to each of us, saying, you can be Christed if you find the feminine. If you do not find the feminine within you, you can be tormented by a judgmental God or a system of belief that suppresses the inner psyche. And so this is very valuable in terms of feminist theology. In fact, it depicts really the role of the Divine Mother, whether we call her Imma in the Western tradition, or Kuan Yin, or any one of the titles we find in the Eastern tradition, in India, and in Tibet, China, Japan. All of these traditions are meaningless in terms of a religion that emphasizes only the male. So this book is revolutionary, and it fits really the work of the 21st century. It forecasts eventually the marriage of the spiritual and scientific through the feminine mind.
Well, many religions and mystical traditions are now talking about the Divine Mother, the return of the Divine Mother. Even Native American, Hindu, all the literature I read is all about this return of the female, of this female essence. Now, is the Divine Mother, I've asked you this before, an embodiment, an essence, or is it like the understanding of the Christ being in each one of us? Or is there an external figure that is this divine being that appears as the Virgin Mary, or as Isis, or as the white buffalo calf woman? Is that separate from us?
We would say, regarding the complexity of the Pista Sophia, it's both and. In other words, the underlying psyche of the universe is in part feminine. You find this in the traditions of the Far East, in the Indian and the Tibetan sutras, the sacred text. You find it in the West, depicted in Proverbs chapter 8, or depicted all throughout the lesser-known mystical literature of Christianity and Judaism. But in a proper sense, there is above all of this, as you can see by this marvelous icon from Greece, the realization that there was a universe beyond us, through which the divine and the human participate together. And in some instance, the feminine operates on many levels. Our cosmic counterparts are part of the mothering aspect of life. And in this depiction of the birth of the Christ child, we see our own birth of the Christ nature within ourselves. In the depiction of the vase or the chalice, we see the coming together of the various emanations of the tree of life.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So this is a Greek depiction of something sacred we find in the Psalms, we find even in the very first chapters of Genesis, that the divine Shekinah, or divine Ruach, Spirit of God, is able to take on many forms. It is within us as well as beyond us.
So, well, you mentioned, first of all, that there was female disciples as well as male disciples that Jesus had. I think that's very important for people to understand, that it wasn't just this little boys' club that they had going. You know, they had equal participation among the females, and that's a big revolutionary statement for a lot of hardcore Christians.
Exactly, and I feel this is one of the reasons the Coptic Gnostics were persecuted, and after the 3rd century really disappeared from the scene. This knowledge gets buried, and not until really the awakening of the Nag Hammadi texts, 1945 to 1948, do we really see how prevalent this teaching was of the Divine Mother in early Christianity. This is something that I feel can unify the African church with the North African philosophies with the Oriental philosophies. In short, the Pista Sophia allows us to understand a much greater cosmology that the early Christians had, and also, as we know, most of them had come out of the Judaic tradition, a higher understanding of what went on for 400 years between the close of the Old Testament and the beginning of the New Testament.
So how do we take this knowledge in the Pista Sophia and activate this divine feminine within us? What's our basic roadmap for that?
The roadmap, as we see in the lips of Sophia herself, are the petitions from the release of the elements of imbalance. So
let's back up. Let's explain people that when Jesus opens this book, he's telling his disciples that he encountered Sophia in this greater kingdom, and she was trapped by these dark forces. And he then relates to his disciples the freeing up of the Sophia, the divine female wisdom, from these dark underworld forces. And they're metaphors for freeing it up in our own lives.
And there are these forces because we are out of balance. We need both the male and female balance. And so in this wonderful cosmology, he explains that there are what are called archons, or forces in the universe, that would inhibit the human race from finding its divine destiny. Today, we would call some of these extraterrestrial and ultra-terrestrial forces of intelligence, those from a different part of our universe that contend with the Spirit. In our next schematic, if you can follow my pen at the bottom of the schematic, we see the various stages of growth. In other words, evolution moves from the material to the non-material, to the light. And in this process, we have to free ourselves not only from the passions within, the imbalance of the psyche, the hatred between the male and the female, the overcoming of the imbalance between the spiritual and scientific parts of life.
Right.
But ultimately, when we merge in unity, we realize there are still other forces in the universe that are behind the experiment or the drama we call human civilization. Going beyond this, we qualify to be cosmic citizens. We qualify to be co-participants in the greater universe.
Once we integrate this, let's say, male ego-based way of being with the heart, the feminine heart, then we create a unity, and then there's a next level to our evolution.
Now, to answer your profound question, how this is done, it's not simply through intellectualisms.
Right.
It is really in divine service, through healing, through higher psychological compassion, through works of charity, understanding of the diversity of humanity. And in the Pista Sophia, we find a teaching of universality. It's really the universal synthesis of how the Divine Mother and the Divine Father must be brought together, not through theology so much, but through a sociology and anthropology of being in the present.
So what is the real core of that integration? What's the practical way of doing that within ourselves?
The core is the self-realization of who we are. We have all come from really the parenting of universal forces at work. Some would call the male and female archetypes, the original parents. We have to come out of this world of chaos and confusion and material imbalance into one of higher spiritual awareness, that we are divine beings, that life is really a divine process of evolution into the light, and in some way, in unity with the many as opposed to the one, the universal as opposed to the parochial, we qualify as universal citizens for a much greater experience.
Thank you. Also, in reading this book, I mean, it's a very complex book, the Pista Sophia, and it seems as if there's stages that Jesus takes his disciples through. So, I mean, yes, it's about divine unity, but at another level, there are steps to follow because it's so complex, this level of development. Like, what would be an initial step? Because it's written in a sense where I guess in Coptic, it's almost mantric, you know, there's repetitions of words and phrases, and I'm just trying to get like a foothold into the specific nature of this book.
In one of the sections of the book, there is a picture of a mandala, which is the sacred geometry. If it can have the camera look carefully at this page, it is a sacred geometry series of the divine name, or the sacred name Dod-He-Vod-He, Hashem, in the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, the science of the many universes.
Yes.
It is by concentration on the divine name through a type of psycholinguistics and musical harmonics that we raise human consciousness. Not only in the Hebrew or the Coptic, but also this pertains to the Sanskrit, the Chinese, we would say even the Japanese, and the Eastern languages, to the use of music, use of self-realization in putting forth higher vibrations into the world, the physical world, day by day. By seeing a higher example, we create a pattern of flow upon a world of flux. We create, as it were, the tree of life out of the cross of suffering, which is the symbol, a metaphor for space and time that we are incarnated into.
Right, and it gives us more of that depth, that wisdom, that unfoldment of our own potential.
Now what this means, in terms of higher psychology, is there's a marriage between male and female, and here in the text we see how the male and female are holding hands, representing a graduation from this physical world into the other dimensional worlds.
Right. What's the symbol of the outstretched arms? What does that mean?
It's to embrace the universe. So we have something that really runs against the orthodoxy of traditional religion, that tries to wrap the hands of God or control the hands of God to the few. Here the arms are extended, and so the grace of God and the love of God is extended outwards into the universe, ever unfolding.
And making a crossing lines at the heart center. You know, it opens
the heart chakra.
Yeah, and that's where I think the feminine resides, in that space.
For me, this book was a labor of love for 15 years to translate the ancient Coptic into Greek and realize there were so many Oriental themes connected. The Divine Mother, the understanding that there were the angelic or the realms of superintelligence, the realization of a higher psychology which would allow us to understand the nature of the indigenous people, the neglected parts of African and Oriental civilization, and most importantly, the centering process, that we have to bring together all of the aspects of science, psychology, and theology if we're going to really evolve humanity meaningfully into the future.
Another specific in this Pista Sophia is what's been mentioned now in books like The Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and even the Da Vinci Code, the close relationship Jesus had with Mary Magdalene.
Exactly.
So do you want to go into that a little bit?
Yes, I do. In fact, in the Pista Sophia, there's a whole book, Book 3, that deals with the relationship of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And she becomes, as it were, the aspect of what some would call the divine consort. She represents the ultimate or penultimate disciple who asked the right questions. She is higher than the Apostle Peter. And she represents the balance that we must have. The male and the female must come together. Ultimately, it is the fall of harmony into asymmetry, which is the fall of the material universe into chaos. So whether we start from a point of Buddhism or Judaism or Christianity, the story is a universal story of the risen Christ saying, you are divine, you have a divine spark, you are an embryo God. Find the path, but look first within yourself before you try to project upon humanity symbols of authority, symbols of parochial dogmatism, and symbols of separation.
So even the story of Jesus and Mary Magdalene are a microcosm of the greater story of the Divine Father, Divine Mother forming in union.
Exactly.
And this is what Jesus is telling his disciples in this book, the Pista Sophia. Let's merge with the divine, and my consort Mary Magdalene is a counterpart to who I am.
Well, you see, Alan, how revolutionary it is. If you look at the three religions of Abraham and the put down of the female, the misdemonstration of Chava or Ahava, of love into the female that is localized, that is separated, marginalized. And here we have, almost 1900 years ago, a teaching that elevates the female, co-equal with the disciples in most instances, and even opens the door for plenitude.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful work, it's a beautiful translation, and it goes along with what many people are saying now about this getting away from the intellect, the way the egoic mind controls the way we think we live in the world, and dropping into this feeling of who we are in the world.
And even what the Europeans would call rational religion, where everything is basically in the hands of male-dominated theology that has to work according to guilt, separation, and historic suppositions, rather than realizing the cosmic now, the divine presence of the I Am. And here in this book, which I encourage all of our listeners to look at, is a return to the use of the divine names, the tree of life, in the fuller Kabbalistic sense, and the realization that early Christianity was a synthesis of Judaism and Christianity on a much higher level than that which came after the 3rd century.
And some of the Kabbalistic knowledge, there is that secret oral tradition that's been passed on. But still, it's negated the feminine. And of course, we're two men talking about it, and I think it's important for us, and it's also important that women now have their voice in the world.
Well, my wife, Desirea, had an equal hand in the translation work, and even in the illustration of the symbol that depicts, as it were, a different fashion of the world of emanations. The crisscrossing of the world of emanations. It brings together the understanding, the wisdom, the higher mind, with that of the human experience.
It's a fantastic book, and I recommend it to people who are investigating spiritual literature and who are interested in the works of Dr. Hurtak and his wife and the Academy for Future Science. It's a whole exploration. Just go a little bit into what the greater work of your organization does, because I think it's important.
Well, this book goes on in Book 4 and 5 to explore the secrets of Egypt, what is underneath the earth. And the Academy for Future Science had the opportunity several years ago in Egypt with underground radar testing to make the first discoveries of what later became known as the Tomb of Osiris that was shown on Fox television in the early 1999. In 1997, using certain sound tests, using certain sacred expressions, mantric expressions, we were able to follow the acoustical vibration feedback and make a path some 110 feet underneath the Giza Plateau where we came across this. So to answer your question, we're involved with Oriental studies, Egyptian studies, studies in South America of the forgotten cultures, to bring together the missing pieces of history, which I believe are necessary for the unity of mankind.
No, I think you're doing great work, and not only that, I think it's important you're bringing out the sophistication that's involved in not the ancient religions and the ancient civilizations, and that they weren't just simple people, but had very developed spiritual sacred sciences that have been lost or covered up by the present-day establishment. So you're bringing that work out, and I think it's very important.
And this is on our website, initiation.cc, where we have a virtual CD experience of going into the underground temples of Egypt. This will explain some of the visual experiences that simply cannot be illustrated in this brief overview.
Right. So let's do some more shows together where we really investigate the depth of this ancient knowledge. I'd be happy to do that.
Wonderful.
Thank you. I've been talking to Dr. Hurtak of the Academy of Future Sciences about the book he wrote with his wife Desirea, Pista Sophia, and many of the other sacred investigations that you are now proceeding in uncovering and bringing to the world. I think it's very important work. So thank you.
We thank you, Alan.
This is Alan Steinfeld for New Realities, and if you want to reach me, I'm at 212-473-6388, or my website, newrealitiestv.com. And what's your website?
Keys of Enoch.org, and AFFS.AFFS.org.
Thank you, Dr. Hurtak. Thank you for watching.